Okay. Well, I want to thank you for asking me to come this evening, Dean. This week has been kind of a rewarding experience for me. Most of my talks are a little more lighthearted, a little bit more amusing and so forth. Tonight's is probably a little more along the serious vein. And tonight, I will say this, it was a very moving experience for me to work on this talk the last couple of weeks. And a little bit just to personalize it and get you coming from where I was on this. Dean asked me if I could do a talk, and I said there was something I'd like to find out a little bit more about. There's a couple of soldiers buried here in Bond County that intrigued me, shall I say. Now, I didn't know much about them, and I thought I would like to know a little more about them. The first one I was going to talk about is down in the Hook Cemetery. His name is Adolph Berner. He's a young man. He was 26 years old when he passed away. And the unusual thing about Adolph Berner, when you go into the Hook Cemetery, there is a statue of a World War I soldier there. It has broken off at the feet. It was made out of concrete, but it's literally a life-size statue of a World War I soldier. Apparently, this was something that was commercially made. But I always thought that just kind of intrigued me, and I thought, well, I'd like to find out a little bit more about him. The other one I wanted to find out about was a private that is buried down at the campground cemetery. His name is June R. Thomason, June Roland Thomason. The reason I always think about June is one that I always think of every year on Memorial Day. When I was about 13 years old, we were having family dinner up there at the house at Kaegy home, and all my cousins were there, and Opal Clinton came to the house. Clantons are just practically part of our family. My dad, Clanton, served on the board of trustees down there at Campground Cemetery, and Opal and Melvin for many years mowed the cemetery. And Opal wanted somebody to help her put the flags out on for Memorial Day. This was the Saturday before Memorial Day. She wanted somebody to put the flags out there at the Campground Cemetery. Dad and Jim farmed together. They were busy in the fields, and so I got drafted into the job of going down there and walking and reading every stone at the Campground Cemetery to put these flags out. At the time when we started, there were 73 of them. We now have 85 veterans buried in the Campground Cemetery. That's one of those little jobs that you get that you have for life. I have done that. My kids have done that. My grandchildren will probably be the ones in charge of putting the flags out in the Campground Cemetery as time goes on. I've got it now down to an art. Dad and I can go down there and we can place the flags in that cemetery in about an hour. You know, I've got a little map so I can always find them. And every year it's funny. There's 2 or 3 stones that we invariably walk past or whatever that I forget where they're at. And then we go down on the list and double check it. There'll be 3 or 4. J.M. Crosby's one of them. Gideon Durham's another one. I can even name the names of the stones that we miss every year because they don't have a regular military marker but just a normal stone on a couple of these guys. They were Civil War veterans. But one of them that always kind of gets me in the Campground Cemetery is over near where my family section is, and it's June Thomason. June Thomason is a World War II veteran, and it just says on his stone, it's George and Florence Shop. I don't know if anybody remembers old Flo Thomason that lived for many years. Flo lived to be about 100 years old. She was Lorraine Schaufelberger's mother. And I've known virtually all of that family and several generations of that family. I know if June Thomason had lived through World War II, I would have known him. I would have went to school with his grandchildren. My kids would be in 4-H programs with his great-grandchildren because that's the way the generations in our families have worked. Whenever I see June Thomason's name on that stone, on the stone it just says, June R. Thomason, lost at sea, on the bottom of the stone. He's not even buried there. And I always kind of feel bad about that thing. Poor old June, he didn't even make it home. I thought I'd like to find out a little bit more about these 2 guys. I asked Nelda, I said, Nelda, do you think you can look up a couple of obituaries for me? She did. She looked up a couple of obituaries, and it's working its way around the room. In about 2 hours' time, Dean called me up, and he says, Kevin, I've got something here for you I think you're going to like. So I went to the house. I found the obituaries. Nelda has transcribed from the Advocate and from Mr. Nolan's sources and from the Illinois State sources the honor roll veterans. These are the veterans that died in the World Wars. In World War I, 24 of our veterans passed away during service in World War I, and we lost 40 of our soldiers during World War II. Within that remarkable book is the stories of each of these men from their obituaries, and most of them have pictures. It's a very moving tribute to have read through that thing. I would highly encourage each of you to get one or borrow one and go through it. I think this is one of the books that's set up out in the garage that Dean can't pull down and make a copy of it for you if you'd like to have it, because there's some remarkable stories in here, and I found 2 of them, and that's what I'm going to be sharing about this evening. To get back to the first 2 soldiers, though, the first 2 I wanted to talk about. Private Berner, buried down in the Hook Cemetery with the neat monument that he's got down there. Private Berner was a young farm walking down in that area. His parents had passed away, and his brothers erected the stone for him. Private Berner was to serve in World War I along with many other of our Bond County veterans. He died in 1918, October of 1918, up at a training camp in Michigan. There's one of our other World War I soldiers, I forget what his name was, but another one of our boys literally died the same day in the same camp. They died of Spanish flu, or influenza, or pneumonia. What I didn't realize was during World War I, during the fall of 1918, there was a terrible epidemic of flu going around. Of our World War I soldiers, the honor roll veterans that died during World War I, 18 of them died of the flu or some related illness. And most of them didn't die overseas, but actually died in this country in the training camps for it. That was the case with Adolph Berner. A number of our World War I veterans, and I was mistaken on him. I thought maybe he was one of them that had had the problems with the mustard gas. A number of our World War I soldiers came home after they had been gassed and so forth by Germany during World War I, and would linger on for a year or 2. There are a number of our veterans buried here in Bond County that literally suffered terrible illnesses over anywhere from a 2 to 10 year period of time. We have got the Purple Heart and a number of medals that was given to one of the Merrifield boys, and he had lived about 10 years like this. One of my veterans at Campground Cemetery, Elmer Mitchell, is buried down there. Everybody, I think, remembers brother Fred Berghoff. Elmer Mitchell would have been his brother-in-law. That's how he was related into it. That Mitchell boy was one of them that was gassed in World War II and brought home and passed away. A couple of the Hockett boys that are buried down in Campground Cemetery had the same thing happen. That's what happened to Private Berner. The second one I was going to talk about a little bit is June Thomason. I did find out what happened to June, and it's kind of an unusual story. Whenever you look up the obituary that was run in the paper, it'll say in there that June Thomason died on June 13, 1944 in France. I thought, well, that's odd. You know, on the stone it clearly says lost at sea. I thought, well, he must have been in Pacific Theater. He wasn't in Pacific Theater. He had served. He was only 25 years old, maybe 22 years old, I believe. And he had served in England. He'd been in England since 1942. He was preparing for the Normandy invasion. I went over to Lorraine's. I talked to one of the nieces, Wendy Schaffelberger, has just recently moved back here. They bought the bed and breakfast out north of town. They moved, her and her husband moved back. I ran into her the other day, and I was asking her about her uncle. I knew June was in one. And she started telling me a couple of stories. And then I went down and talked to Lorraine about it. She lives down on Hookdale Road. This was her brother. And she told me what basically had happened with her brother. He'd been stationed in England for 2 years preparing for the Normandy invasion. He'd been on some other tasks while he was there. They were preparing for the Normandy invasion. On June 5th, 1944, the night before the big invasion took place that morning, he was taken from his unit. Somebody came and got him. He was given a special assignment. It was secret. Nobody knew what it was, and he was taken from his unit. He did not go to the Normandy invasion to the landing with his men. He was one of the men that was put on a boat and was a decoy the night of June 5th. June Thomason was on a boat, and he was farther north up the English Channel. There were several decoy boats in various locations along the English Channel trying to fool the Germans as to what was going on or what was going to go on. There was no radio communication that night because they didn't want to give away the surprise of what was going to be happening the morning of June 6, 1944. June Thomason was never seen again. His ship went down in the English Channel, and that's where he fills a soldier's grave over there. There was 2 things that could have happened. He was either shot out of the water by the Germans because they know there were U-boats in the area, there were submarines and U-boats in the area, by the Germans throughout the English Channel, preparing for what they supposed would be an attack. One of the things that they honestly think happened to him was he was on a carrier of men that was taking troops over to land them on the shores of France. That ship encountered trouble and had to turn around and come back to the English shore. And sadly, there was at least 2 ships, I believe, that turned around in the English Channel and came back the night of the 5th. And when they got back to the seashore of England, were shot out of the water by friendly fire because there was no radio communication allowed that night. Nobody really knows what happened to June, but that is his story. And it's kind of an interesting story. It's kind of unusual, but that was what I was wanting to find out about, was what actually happened. So that's where June R. Thomason is over there. A couple of the guys that surprised me reading through the book. Sergeant Ervine Leidner. He's buried in the Maxey Cemetery over here southeast of Smithboro. Sergeant Leidner had a remarkable career in the military. He'd served for a couple of years. He was 27 years old. What I've got here, this is in Nelda's book. This is details concerning the death of Sergeant Leidner, and this is written from his captain to his parents. And I'm just going to read through this and let you know what happened. The 129th Infantry was given the mission of seizing and securing the vital highway number 5 in northern Luzon on the Philippine Islands, which leads directly into the Kaegy Valley. Accomplishing this mission, it would seal the enemy forces in the valley and ensure our forces an uninterrupted supply line for the complete annihilation of the enemy on the Luzon. I was designated as the assault company on the morning of May 31st, 1945. The attack had progressed for some time when our troops encountered heavy sniper fire from high ground to the right of the highway. 3 of our men in the company were wounded as a result of this sniper fire, and a call was sent to rush medical aid and litter bearers to the wounded men. Your son was the leader of the litter squad that was sent in to aid his wounded comrades. He succeeded in reaching the wounded and greatly aided in giving first aid to the wounded and placing them on the gurneys to be evacuated. Just as he was directing his squad in the task of evacuation, Ervine was hit by the fire of the enemy. He was interred with full military honors in the American Cemetery on Luzon, and burial rites were conducted by an Army Protestant chaplain. Ervine was one of the most popular men in the company, and as a leader of men, he was always willing and energetic in any task assigned to him. His absence in the company will be keenly felt for a long time to come. The officers and enlisted men of the company also join me in expressing their deepest sympathy to you. Please feel free to write me for any additional information you may desire. Signed, Captain William Blackwell, Commanding Officer, Sergeant Leidner's Company. What a remarkable story. This is Congressional Medal of Honor stuff. He was disinterred from the Philippines. I was asking Elaine about this earlier. He was disinterred from the American Cemetery. He was brought back, and he is buried at the Maxey Cemetery.
The whole family.
With honors out there with his family lot.
His folks lived on the riverbank. And they were rough. I mean, a rough life. And yet he went to the service
and he served for a number of years in New Guinea, a number of different places throughout. Well, this was towards the end of World War I.
Well guy.
Yeah. Such could be said of the next man I'm going to read about as well. This is Lieutenant Marvin Wise. Marvin Howard Wise, age 25, the son of Philip and Lena Kersey Wise, was born July 17, 1920 in LaGrange Township, Bond County, Illinois. He was inducted into the service at Centralia in October 1942, having been employed there with the Rural Electric Association at the time of his registration. Sergeant Wise was killed in action against the Japanese on Luzon on February 16, 1945. He was with an infantry company that had seen action in New Guinea, having recently been transferred to the Philippine area when this invasion began. Before being sent to New Guinea, he was in Hawaii for some time. He served with the 130th Infantry. The Greenville sergeant and 2 of his buddies were in a foxhole that morning during a hot battle with the Japanese on the road to Baguio, summer capital of the Philippines. A grenade from the enemy was thrown in the foxhole, and Sergeant Wise sacrificed his own life by throwing himself on the grenade, thereby saving the lives of his 2 friends. He was awarded the Silver Star posthumously. He was survived by brothers Dale, Cecil, Freddie, and sisters Joyce and Ruth, buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. I did a little looking on Wise to find out who he was, because there's a number of Wise families here in the area. I do know this. I know he is one of the cousins of Don Wise that was administrator at the hospital for a number of years. Their fathers were first cousins. They're some of the Wises that were located here in town. He's buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. As you drive into the cemetery, just veer to the left and just west of where like some of the Birkenstocks and so forth are buried there in those front lots. He's just west down there in that area. There again, Medal of Honor stuff. Whenever you've sacrificed your life for your country and to save your fellow countrymen.
Is Philip Wise
mentioned Philip
Yes.
Wise is his brother, and he's a banker. Or last I had contact with him, he was up in the Decatur area.
It just says Dale, Cecil, Freddie, and sisters Joyce and Marie. Philip was his dad. That's the one they
Well,
haven't
there's a
listed as.
Philip's son too.
Okay, they could well be. After having read about these couple of guys, I was really struck by this. Being a historian and so forth, I really wasn't aware of the ultimate sacrifice that some of these men had made, and I was very, very greatly impressed to read about this. I'd like to just say a few things. Most of you know I'm a Lincoln scholar. One of the things about Lincoln that amazes me is not only did he lead this country through a terrible war, but Lincoln's words still lead us today. I'd like to note, as we remember these four veterans that I've mentioned this evening, just a few words of Lincoln's, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave that last full measure of their devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Tom Brokaw wrote a book a few years ago called The Greatest Generation. I think most of you have probably seen this, maybe read excerpts and so forth from it. The Greatest Generation, part of the reason they talk so much about the Greatest Generation is the contributions that they made. This was written about the World War II generation. This could have just as easily been written about any of our American veterans as far as I'm concerned. The veterans that survived tend to come home. They've given community service. They were interested in community service. They gave to their country. The men I've just talked about sacrificed their lives for the country. A couple of them sacrificed their lives to save their own friends. A remarkable journey that their life took on this. One of the things I see living in a small community is the community service that is performed throughout this community. And when I think of Lincoln's words that he says in the Gettysburg Address about taking increased devotion, that the cause which they gave their last full measure of devotion, I think nobody resembles that more than our surviving American veterans. What I mean by that are the people that I see doing and performing community service within our own communities. When I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of the ones from the World War II generation, like my good friend Arnold Hunter, who came home and started a family, worked as a mail carrier, giving community service, helped lead his church. I think of the Dean Anthonys, who served in World War II, that came home and has served and led this society and done all of the work they do. I think of the Fred Baumbergers that served on a school board and started the rural 911 system and the many things that he's accomplished, the speed Jenners, and the things that I've seen him do through Kiwanis and turning pancakes. I think about our Vietnam veterans and our Korean War veterans, and I think of the service that they've given this community. None better exemplified than the two sitting back here in the corner. When I think of the contributions you've made to the community, Tony, and Carmen, you as well. I don't know how many pork burgers you cooked over the years, Tony, but Carmen could probably give us a pretty good indication. She probably got a pretty good count. I see that. I see that through all of our veterans that we have here, through the Kent Maple, and I can't help but think that some of these guys, like Tony and Kent, and our veterans of that era are making sacrifices because they are Bolingers from our community that weren't able to come home. I think about Fred and Dean and Speed, just to mention a few, and Arnold, of the fact that they probably knew Merwin Wise and a couple of these other guys and the service that they do in honor of these men and give back to the communities here. It's been a very meaningful journey reading about these men, and it was a very, very special time for me to do this and think about it and reflect on it a little bit. With that, I think I'm going to draw things to a close. One thing I would like to do, though, this evening, Dean, I know you're not much of a reader. I do have something for you here. In fact, I picked this up for you some time ago. I've been thinking of the right moment to give to you. This is Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation, about the World War II veterans. And I think of all the service that you've done and all of your comrades and all of your friends. And I thought, this is one, if you're going to pick up and read something, why don't you pick up and read a couple chapters, a couple of these guys in here. I'm surprised your name isn't in it. But I thought I'd like to present that to you this evening and let you have that. I think maybe you could enjoy that as much as any of them.
Well, I tell you, Tom Brokaw is the only reporter on the that I enjoy. The rest of them, I never miss Tom Brokaw. But the rest of them, I don't care whether I listen to them or not. Thanks a lot.
You're sure welcome. With that, I'm going to bring things to a close. I will be glad to answer anything I can for you if you have any questions. And I've put the 2 books out here that I brought up this evening. The 2 books that are floating around, as I mentioned, are the honor roll book. The honor roll book is actually the obituaries of some of these soldiers, a couple of the stories that I just read to you this evening. The other one is all of the veterans that is buried here in Bond County. That too, compiled by the Genealogical Society. You talked earlier about the Veterans Monument we have uptown. We do have wonderful, nice as you'll see in any community, really.
Right.
And this society has worked very hard to honor the older veterans as well with the monuments that I see up over on 6th Street Cemetery too. This organization is I'm very pleased to be associated with it. We take this very seriously. Of course, founder of the Historical Society, Mr. Nolan, he started collecting data and records on all of our veterans many, many years ago. We've carried it thus far that we can put together the books and have the documents that we have to this day to study and appreciate the contributions these men made. So with that, I'm going to draw things to a close. You have something, Lester?
Yeah, I guess I want to say a little bit. When I was a little kid, June Thomason was my relation.
Yes.
And I was a history buff even when I was a little kid. And the thing I could never understood, I can remember me asking my grandpa Homer, probably I've been 5 times at least, asking him, well, just what happened to him? And I always got the same bad look, and we don't really know. He was just lost at sea, and that's all we know. And as a little kid, I could never understand that. And Kevin's basically telling me the same story. We still don't really know.
Lorraine told me that after the war, when the war was over, that his captain, the captain of his company, did come through here. He was from here in the Midwest, and he did come down to George and Flo's farm down there in Malcolm Township. It's right there by the Illinois Power Station out there in that area of the county. And found the farm to look them up and tell them, look, this is what we do know, but we don't really know what happened. And there never, ever was an answer for what, I mean, they know that he was lost in the English Channel. They know that he was probably one of the decoy missions that was going on that evening. They know that he did not go with his men to land on the Normandy shores that morning, and that's as much as they know. But at least I know more than I used to know. If you read it in the Advocate and you see he died June 13th in France, that was basically the notification time. That's when it came, and that's when it was put in the Advocate. So that's why the dates are so different in his obituary of what actually happened.
Yeah, I was just always told he was lost at sea.
But that is where it was. Any other questions this evening?
Talking about Martin Wise,
Yes.
he's a couple years older than me. The story I got, floating around at the time, there's 3 guys in the box hold pretty well standard procedure. And so the other guys, if they roll it, and I'll take care of it. So they can keep on shooting. Otherwise, they lost all 3 of them. So I think the procedure was to slap your helmet on it, but that didn't always work.
And it may not, I don't know. When I talked to him, when I was talking to Lorraine about the Thomason boy, and I had mentioned about the other couple guys that I was going to be talking about that evening, she knew Mervin Wise as well, and she said he was the nicest kid. She says we all knew him, and he was so popular, and she said he would just do anything for anyone. And she said he was the nicest kid. She said, I remember when that happened, and everybody said the same thing, that they just weren't a bit surprised at him doing something like, to have sacrificed himself like that. One of the other soldiers that was in there, that was talked about within that book, and I'm trying to think who it was. It seems to me like it's a Stowe. One of the Stowes is mentioned in that book. I
Yeah,
think
that
that's
was
correct.
Attorney Stowe's twin
Attorney
brother.
Stowe's brother that was in there. Yeah, Charles.
Twin brother, wasn't it?
He had something, he was assigned, and a lot of as you read through those and read some of the bits in there, you'll find that we had men that died in some prison marches and a number of other things that happened. Some of them died of disease, some of them died of injury, some of them just had freak accidents. One guy was a school teacher, graduate of Greenville College. He was like 39 years old. He ended up working as a translator both in Europe for Germany, translating between the German and English soldiers. After that was over, they shipped him over to the Philippines, and he just passed away in his sleep. They found him in a cot one morning. I guess had a heart attack or something. But he was an older man. He was like 37, 38 years old. But that Stowe, something unusual about him, he was an airline pilot, and he was one of them that was flying reconnaissance missions. And he was also responsible for flying the leaders of the troops over occupied territory to figure out where they were going to go to try and advance troops and so forth as they went across Europe. And he had literally come home to see his parents, and he knew that he probably wouldn't make it. And he told them, you folks, you need to be prepared for this. I probably will not be back home. I mean, he literally not only answered his duty, but knew the hazards of what he was going into, and had really made his arrangements when he was home on a furlough one time before he went back to Europe. He apparently served for a while, came home, and then went back to the front. But he told his parents then he knew what he was doing and where he was going, that the likelihood was he had been shot. That guy had been shot down, I think. He had been injured like 3 times and shot out of the sky twice already. That had already happened to him. Like he'd been shot down and had close calls with death about 5 times before then. And knowing what his next assignment was going to be over the German lines as they were advancing across Germany, he knew he probably wouldn't make it. And that was within that story. So like I say, it's been kind of a heavy topic.
Now,
But it's
he
a
was
very
buried
meaningful-
in Normandy, right?
Yes, he is buried.
Because I know Doc Stowe one year went over to visit his grave.
That was one thing that's confusing within that book, and it's not really clear on some of them, like the one I had, the Leidner boy that I talked about. It wasn't clear where he had been buried overseas. Well, was he disinterred and brought back home or not? And you confirmed that he was. On Mervin Wise, I have not been able to find out for sure on him. I tried to find some family members or somebody that would have known. The Wises that I know that live here in this community knew of him, and people knew him, know he has a stone, but didn't know enough of the details to really know for sure whether he was one of them that was just a
All
stone.
Jack Spratt is a friend of his brother.
Okay.
And he's in the hospital out here.
That'll just answer. Like I said,
He may be home.
I found this to be rather fat. When I found out about these couple guys in particular, I thought that was just worthy of bringing to your attention this evening. So,
Something about the Springfield.
Dean, what was the unit that you were in, and when did you serve? Before we close up this evening, 'cause I think you're done then this evening, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was in the anti-aircraft outfit, and we had the biggest anti-aircraft guns that they had at that time, 120 millimeters, and they weighed 62 tons. Each one they're fired by radar. But I did my basic training in California, and then our outfit went over to Pearl Harbor. We was around Pearl Harbor with our anti-aircraft guns for the rest of the war. That's about the size of it is for me.
So we go around here. Tom, Willie, were you either one in? I don't remember.
I'm the first cavalry in the Philippines, I think,
What years were you in, Tom?
44, 45.
One of my highlights, I met General Wainwright. You know, he was captured on Corregidor, and he was a 3-star general, you know, and all during the war, why he was captured. And after the war there, one day, why, I looked out the window, and here was a Jeep with 4 stars on it, pulling up outside. And I thought to myself, I wonder what general that is, you know, a 4-star general. So I go out there, and it was this General Wainwright. And he talked maybe to me for about 15 minutes. And he was telling that about it, Corregidor there. And he said that we used everything to shoot. He said we ran out of ammunition, and he said we used anti-aircraft guns to shoot at the enemy on the ground and everything. But I kind of got a thrill out of meeting Wainwright, you know. I couldn't believe it. Anybody else got anything that they'd like to bring up? This has been a very enjoyable meeting, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of fun.